Hello and welcome to the DST Boss Tournament, a battle royale that pitches every morbidly malignant foe against one another to see who will truly come out on top. But before we get started, we need to lay down a number of house rules to keep the brawling fun, fair, and also actually possible in some cases. If you want to skip to the good stuff, each section of the video will be labelled on the timeline, so you can skip ahead. Many bosses in DST are classified as raid bosses, which usually means that they have amped amounts of health, damage, and a modicum of special abilities to boot. However, any bosses participating in this tournament will only have access to those abilities when defending against an interloper. This is for two main reasons. One, so that two bosses who like to hang around a certain area or object, such as the Dragonfly or Klaus, can actually fight each other. And two, so that bosses don't rely on cheesing their way through the tournament by summoning minions or the like. The second rule is pretty simple. Ancient Fuelweaver is disqualified. Sorry bud, I mean, you can literally turn invincible. What were you expecting? To be allowed to compete? No! Get out! Since none of the other bosses can go insane in order to actually disable the Fuelweaver's shield, he would be guaranteed to win, which wouldn't make the tournament very fun to watch. Even without this shield, no boss would be able to stand a chance against his ludicrous self-healing abilities, so yeah. In this tourney, he's effectively been replaced with the reanimated skeleton, who, granted, is way less powerful than Fury, but at least they have more than one representatives in the battle. Furthermore, the Forest Stalker will not be included either, because it doesn't have any attacks. Rule 3 states that the Crab King will also be disqualified. Although he isn't literally unbeatable like the Fuelweaver is, this guy is basically the cheese machine. The fight's supposed to be fought on a boat, and, well, bosses can't repair leaks, or use ice staffs to cancel the geyser attacks, meaning that they're going to either instantly die, or even if they're exempt from sinking by being a flying boss, they're just going to get frozen over and over again, as this is the only Crab King attack that directly targets opponents. That's right, Crustacean Man. Out! Rule 4 denotes that the Shadow Clockworks will all fight as one unit, as they are extremely weak themselves, outclassed by even a lowly Treeguard. Plus, the boss's entire gimmick involves them being fought together, so it wouldn't really make sense for them to take part individually. As there are only 14 bosses in the original lineup, there will be one boss left without a pairing in the second round. Whoever this boss happens to be, will be set up against the frosty Winter's Feastclops, a special variant of Deerclops who appears during the Winter's Feast event. Feastclop is more or less identical to Deerclops, except that it can weave in an additional laser attack as well as a standard ice smash. If Feastclops wins this fight, it'll continue on through the tournament as usual. Feastclops was chosen for this role as it's basically just a reskin of an already existing boss, with only one sizable difference. That's all in regards to the rules and regulations side of things, so let the competition begin. The boss pairings have been randomly generated and occasionally manually adjusted to keep the fighting as fun and fair as possible, which is admittedly not that much, but whatever. For the first fight of the tournament, we have the wizened and corrupted Ancient Guardian contending the ragtag gang of Shadow Pieces. And they're off. The Guardian interrupts the Pieces' slumber, and they aren't happy. Awakening, they mercilessly begin to weave clever attacks in between the Minotaur's swings, but when the Minotaur's horn does connect, it sure packs a mighty punch. The first to fall is the Shadow Rook, its slow and powerful attacks leaving it vulnerable to the Guardian's weighty blows. Enraged, the Bishop and the Knight grow in strength, continuing their assault on the mighty Cave Beast. Next to fall is the Shadow Knight, its long reach and high damage not enough to prevent its death. The Bishop takes advantage of this and grows into a hulking monstrosity, finally towering over the Guardian itself. The onslaught continues, but despite its newfound strength, the Bishop ends up falling to the Guardian's destructive blows and tough hide. And our first victim for today is none other than the Protector of the Labyrinth. Still with over a third of its health remaining, battered but battle-hungry, the Guardian charges on into the second round. For fight number 2, we have the brute Deerclops, wielder of wintry forces, up against the Antlion, rugged protector of the Sanctuary Oasis. Deerclops quickly closes in for the kill, the Antlion appearing somewhat defenseless due to its inability to locomote. However, in place of movement, the Antlion possesses the power to shape the sand surrounding it into piercing spikes or towering blockades. The sand spires it constructs provide a sufficient distraction for the destruction-obsessed Deerclops, who often favours brutalizing the nearest object instead of calculating the most optimal target. Despite Deerclops' ability to desecrate many of Antlion's sand structures at once, they manage to buy the main monstrosity enough time to whittle down the myopic Servine, ultimately resulting in its victory. Deerclops' cadaver left in the dust. Fight number 3 is the motherly Moose, taking on the shambling Cave Stalker. The skeletal monstrosity begins by ensnaring the Goose in a dastardly bone cage, preventing any chance of escape. Dislocating its immense horned skull, the Stalker viciously swipes at the Moose, the twisted horns atop its dislodged cranium gouging deep. Angered, the Goose retaliates by butting the skeleton with its impressive rack. Once the Moose breaks free of the Stalker's bone cage, the towering figure is quick to form another one. But this time, it foolishly manages to trap itself as well, centimeters from the enraged Goose's form. The two beasts duke it out, a hair's breadth from one another, until finally, The Moose's heavy-hitting swings overcome the Stalker's brittle and spell-forged bones, the heaving and cracking automaton crumbling to dust. Next up is the infernal menace Dragonfly, protector of the arid flats, up against the drone monarch Bee Queen, governor of the hive clusters. By far the biggest battle yet, these two colossi begin the fight all holds barred, fighting tooth and nail, or rather scale and stinger. Not long in, and the Dragonfly is already enraged, scales blazing with an iridescent power, as the Bee Queen's many equerries slowly begin to overcome smouldering insectoid. Anger rising, the Dragonfly furiously smashes its way into the ground, making a tsunami of fire that engulfs all that stand near, but even this is not enough to overcome the never-ending waves of royal servants spawning from the Bee Queen's abdomen. Eventually, the pulse of the Dragonfly's heart draws to a close, its corpse riddled with dozens upon dozens of tiny, stinger wounds. For fight number 5, we have the quad-winged avian menace, Malbatross, up against the 8-legged arachnid entity, the Queen of Spiders. The Malbatross initiates the fight with a foul slap from its fishy tail, causing the Spider Queen to retaliate with a series of nasty pokes from its sharp appendages. The Queen attempts to summon reinforcements in the form of freshly spawned spiderlings to swarm the Malbatross with, but the swing of the Tross's hefty tail takes out the spiders as soon as they are spawned. Frighteningly quickly, the now ex-Queen is overpowered by the mighty bird, the 8-legged royal hierarchy toppled. For the next fight, we have the hellish brute Klaus, opposing the diseased symbiote Toadstool in our second raid boss tier fight of today. The beast Klaus quickly corners the immense toad, slicing into its spore-laced hide with his demonic claws, occasionally singeing or freezing off more of the fungus with the aid of his elemental deer familiars. The toad retaliates by launching an artillery of volatile spores into the sky. Once nestled in fertile soil, the spores rapidly develop and then explode into a powerful release of toxic fumes. The brute force of the gases and fungal tissue leaves significant wounds in Klaus and his deer. However, the Toadstool's lack of direct attacks is certainly not helping its cause. The toad's clumsy and unpredictable spore barrages eventually slay both of Klaus's beloved Servine companions, sending the brute into an unforgiving rage, surely spelling doom for the dim-witted toad. Klaus's swipes and bestial fury increase threefold, allowing it to easily overpower the slow and imbecilic Toadstool. For the final fight in the first bracket of today's tournament, the insatiable Bearger, destructor of anything edible, is being taken on by the Treeguard, ancient spirits of the woods evoked, angered that this beast has toppled one too many trees. The Treeguard begins the tussle by giving the bear a rightfully earned strike from behind. The unsuspecting bear turns around disgruntled. He's often harassed by angry forest spirits, given his wanton destruction of forest land. The Bearger returns with a riposte, giving the leaf a walloping with his fearsome bloodletters. The squabble continues, claw on branch, rending and tearing, until finally, the earthy husk of the Treeguard cracks and crumbles, landing to rest among the undergrowth. Yet another victim to the Bearger's lust for destruction. And so the first tier of today's battles draws to a close. Just like that, the weak are beginning to be weeded out, now to prepare for round 2. Round 2 is probably the least balanced bracket of the tournament because this is the point where raid bosses are going to be paired against non-raid bosses, which was sort of inevitable because of the nature of the tournament, but which means that this round's going to be more than a little bit predictable at times. But don't lose interest, for this process is necessary for finding out which boss is truly the strongest. For our first fight of the second round, the two airborne aviarchs known as Bee Queen and Malbatross collide in the ultimate showdown of feathers and carapaces, but it's no surprise as to who will come out on top, as the usurper Malbatross's slow swings and frail composure are no match for the regal Bee Queen's tough hide and never-ending swarms of grumblebees. The mighty Tross can occasionally take out small numbers of the Bee Queen's armada of grumbly guards, but they don't stop coming, and between the weighty swings of the Bee Queen's stinger and the constant harassment from her minions, the Malbatross falls. Our second fight is not as unbalanced as the first, with the noble ancient Guardian paired up against the exotic Antlion. Shaking the very ground beneath it, the Guardian towers toward the immobile Antlion, the latter watching on in fear. But as the Guardian nears, the very sands upon which it walks begin to shift, forming penetrating spikes and a ring of silicate castles, trapping the centuries-old beast inside with its prey. Although the Guardian lacks the crowd-control prowess of the Antlion's previous contender, Deerclops, it more than makes up for this with a much tougher hide and devastating single-target attacks. After the Guardian takes care of the Antlion's sand spires itself, or they get blown away by the unrelenting desert wind, the Guardian's able to gore the defenseless creature with its horn. The Antlion, with no defense other than the shifting sands, is quick to fall, allowing the rampaging Guardian to progress into round 3. Next up is the governing Goose taking on the chain demon Klaus. Sometimes fate is cruel, and this is a fine example of that philosophy because, let's be honest, Moose, you're fucked. Between being stunned off by Klaus's ice blast and singed by the fire, Goose's horns can barely scratch Klaus's demonic complexion, and so it ends. The persistent amalgamation felled its bruised, battered, singed and frostbitten body, landing violently in the snow. And for our final fight in the second round, a mysterious chill fills the air, not like one that Bearger's ever experienced. And then, Out of the swirling snowflakes emerges the Winter's Feastclops, a seasonal variant of Deerclops, arriving on the scene as this tournament's backup contender. What sets the Feastclops apart from the regular Deerclops is the presence of a strange glowing energy radiating from its singular eye, giving it a piercing vermilion glow. When it desires, the Feastclops can manifest the alien energies that inhabit its singular glowing orb, and let forth a blast of heat and light energy in a linear path, incinerating all that it touches. However, despite the Feastclops' arsenal of deadly magic powers, Bearger still manages to triumph. Brute force trumping psychic power. And so concludes our lineup for round 2. Now, the preliminary round begins. 4 of the most powerful monsters face off in 2 separate battles, and the victors of these 2 will face off in the ultimate final round. For our first competition in round 3 comes the Dominator, Ancient Guardian, previous victor over the Shadow Pieces and the Antlion, contending the Dominator of the Skies, Bee Queen, Punisher of both Dragonfly and the Malbatross. The 2 creatures engaging combat, the Guardian charging through a crowd of freshly birthed grumblebees, landing its powerful horn deep inside the Bee Queen's flesh. The 2 creatures let forth their eardrum-rupturing cries and roars, and the true fight begins. Truly, nothing is held back, the 2 creatures both desperate for entrance to the final round. Horn and sting up, brute and cunning, the creature's ceaseless grapple will only stop when faced with mortem. Slowly but surely, the victor becomes clearer and clearer. Although Guardian's well equipped for dealing with singular powerful targets, ensuring its previous victories over the Shadow Clockworks and the Antlion, it fumbles against large crowds, or swarms, of enemies. And so the Guardian slowly begins to crumble, just like the ancient civilization it once protected, defeated once more by the insectoid royalty. And just like that, we have our first contestant for the final battle. And for our second combat taking place in the 3rd round, it's Klaus, destroyer of the shambling Toadstool and the vexing moose, taking on Bearger. Wait, how the hell have you managed to make it to the 3rd round? Alright then. Taking on Bearger, demolisher of the earthly Treeguard and the mysterious Feastclops. The 2 giants begin the bout, and, well, it's anyone's guess as to who's going to win. Bearger's penchant for destruction causes his hulking AoE attacks to quickly tear through the Klaus's beloved deer, which, yet again, sends the monstrosity into an unquenchable fury. Claws and horns, hide and paws all slash and gut and rip and rend until Bearger, the one who dared to kill the deer, is felled, just like all the trees that came before him. Well, this is it, the ultimate showdown, the penultimate fight, the end. These 2 monstrous matriarchs will finally face it off in the ultimate battle. May the best monster win. The fight begins, Bee Queen scraping Klaus with her immense stinger, brilliant blasts of elemental energy exploding around the pair as they joust in brutal competition. Bee Queen's usual tactic of spamming swarms of bumbling bee guards is undercut by Klaus's deer blasts, as these can freeze or settle like crowds of enemies at a time, making them panic and reducing their use as meat shields and distractions. Although Bee Queen and Klaus continue to attack each other, occasionally one of the Bee Queen's familiars escapes the constant explosions and manages to damage Klaus's deer. The demon calls in a number of Crampi to distract the Queen's entourage from slaying his Servine summoners, but alas, his minions are quickly and efficiently disposed of by the Queen's brutal attacks. Ultimately, the Crampi's death was in vain, as eventually one of the Klaus's deer companions falls once more. And, for the last time, the jolly demon spirals into an indomitable force of rage, now truly giving the Bee Queen a run for her money. Although Klaus has lost his elemental support fire, he intelligently seeks out the Bee Queen through her increasingly terrifying swarm of regal bodyguards. Claws tearing apart her honeyed flesh, Klaus is on the offense, keeping the Queen as a high priority target. The Queen herself is barely able to fight back. Her increasingly feeble swings are stark comparison to Klaus's rage-fueled swipes, but somehow, the Queen manages to overcome the wretched beast, his furred corpse landing amongst the undergrowth with a thud. Or so she thought. For Klaus rises again, having cleverly hidden a life-giving amulet around his neck. He once again has the upper hand against the dying insectoid. Unchained, unrestrained, and still fueled by hatred, Klaus's chains slip off, revealing the true beast underneath. Lunging at the bee through a crowd of minions, Klaus unrelentlessly brings her closer and closer to death, although he himself is also close to falling, slowly being whittled away by the Queen and her guards. And finally, in our closest battle yet, the Bee Queen finally falls, almost putting a stop to Klaus's endless flailing about. And so the curtains fall, the victor of the competition finally realized. Above all stands Klaus, champion of the constant and spreader of Christmas cheer. God help us all. Hey, thanks for sitting through this whole video. I kind of wanted to try something different. Well, I didn't even finish that sentence. It's blindingly obvious how different this video was to the usual stuff, so yeah, hopefully it turned out good. If you want, please feel free to leave a comment with... God, I hate writing addendums, they're all the same. Look, if you liked it, just let me know. Just say it. Same thing if you hated it as well. Oh, yeah, also, follow me on Twitch. I'm streaming every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Twitch.tv/FreddoFilms. Check it. Okay, am I done now? This is getting awkward. Just gonna get the video to 8 minutes. I'm joking. Okay, whatever. I'm done. Bye.